Hey ladies, Justin Janoska here, and I'm going to welcome you to this training all about hidden truths about the thyroid, the systemic impact of Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, and why you need more help. That's right. You need more help because, listen, it's not your fault, but medications and changing your diet around is not enough to put your Hashimoto's in remission, okay? So the issue is that conventional medicine and doctors are instilling this idea that hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's is an isolated issue and that nothing else matters, right? It's just your thyroid. Take this med and that's it. And this reductionist mindset is really costing us. It's why we're stuck. It's why our symptoms are still here. It's why we have flare-ups, and it's why we're not ultimately healed. Okay, and that's a big problem. So this whole presentation is all about bringing you awareness about what the thyroid is actually impacting in the body and why that is so pivotal to healing. Because if you don't actually correct for the weak links in your chain, then you're never going to get better. Okay, so this is all about knowledge, information, so you can understand, well, what actually is being affected in my body right now, what organs, right? And learn how to correct for that, because it goes both ways. It's a bidirectional issue most of the time, where thyroid impacts multiple organs, but if those organs are not functioning properly, it's going to negatively impact the thyroid and other organs as well, right? So that's what this is about. So let's dive right into this, okay? So let's first look at this illustration I drew here, my fine art skills. So if we're so actually, here's the order of events here. We're going to look at the gut, how the thyroid impacts the gut and digestion. Then we're going to look at the adrenals. Then we're going to check out the kidneys and what's going on there. Then we're going to see how the thyroid impacts the liver and detoxification, the gallbladder, the heart, and then lastly, the brain, okay? Those are the major systems that I want to cover. Now, obviously, thyroid impacts a lot more than that, but these are the major, organs that we need to really consider. And for what I do with clients, this is what I look at, right? I'm looking at, someone's liver, their kidneys and pancreas and seeing, well, what's going on, if there's any issues there, because you have to correct for that. You have to fix those issues while also fixing the thyroid, all right? So let's obviously start with the gut, okay? One thing we need to really understand is that thyroid hormone has a major impact on inflammation in the intestines, okay? It is one of the things that keeps the cell walls in the small intestines, the mucosal lining, strong and intact, okay? You guys know about leaky gut, and honestly, it is the underpinning of Hashimoto's. It's always there, right? There's some level of intestinal permeability. So when you have inadequate thyroid hormone, well, guess what? You're increasing that risk for leaky gut. So that's one of the issues with low thyroid. But of course, digestion. And listen, thyroid stimulates this hormone called gastrin. And gastrin is a hormone that stimulates hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells in the stomach. So when you have low thyroid, naturally you have low stomach acid. And this is very, very common. I see this a lot. And the symptoms that would accompany that are bloating, gas following a meal, fullness during and after meals, undigested food perhaps, and belching, right? So aside from that, you also are at risk for something called SIBO. You may have heard that term before, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that presents a whole bunch of issues. But when you have SIBO, it actually can put you at risk for anemia. Okay, and the reality is that SIBO, these bacteria, they eat up the iron and B12, and that's obvious. Those are obviously important nutrients for red blood cells. Okay, which can obviously put you in an anemic state. But aside from SIBO, low stomach acid will cause inflammation. It'll cause more infections, overgrowth, and honestly, it'll interfere with thyroid absorption. So even if you're taking like quote unquote, normal amounts of thyroid medication in the right dosages according to your doctor, if you have inflammation, you're not going to absorb it well at all. And actually, this is very common. Functional hypothyroidism is a real thing where doctors don't tell you. And that's when thyroid hormone doesn't get absorbed. So it kind of sits out in the blood and it causes all the symptoms you're experiencing, but on paper, you look normal, right? See that disconnect? That's why you feel like you're not being listened to and your doctor thinks he or she is right. And unfortunately, they're so dogmatic that they don't even bother to listen to you, and they'll just, maybe increase your medication when really it's a systemic issue. It's because you have not control for the inflammation. among other things, but I'm just, letting you know that. So aside from B12 and iron deficiency, having low stomach acid really just presents a whole bunch of issues. I mean, it's a lot to handle sometimes. But low thyroid results in a decrease in the production of red blood cells in bone marrow too. So you have issues with digesting and absorbing B12 and iron from your diet to make, red blood cells, but having low thyroid, impacts the bone marrow. Red blood cells got to come from somewhere, and it comes from the bone marrow. So it's all, it's a multifactorial issue. And one other thing I want to say is that pernicious anemia, right? That's an autoimmune disease where intrinsic factor is attacked by immune cells. And intrinsic factor is what's responsible for absorbing B12. So, 10% of people with Hashimoto's really have pernicious anemia. So you have to rule that out too. And you can test for that too. All right. And so with regard to the pancreas and bile, I want to say this real quick. I mean, low stomach acid, impacts the gallbladder and pancreas. It's all a chain reaction. So when you have low stomach acid, you naturally have slow bile flow, a sluggish bile, gallbladder, and pancreas. So you're not spitting out pancreatic enzymes, and you're not stimulating bile from the gallbladder. So that's an issue in and of itself with digesting like fat, right? You need bile. You need to digest fat. You need bile. So that's what I need to say about the gut. All right. And that's obviously a very important issue right here. So let's move on to the adrenals. All right. So high cortisol from daily stress or from other stressors like metals, pathogens, toxins, mold, whatever, can cause insulin resistance. You know that term, I'm sure. It's tossed around in type 2 diabetes, but honestly, you don't need diabetes to have insulin resistance or PCOS. So you can easily be insulin resistant, and really high cortisol can later turn into not only insulin resistance if it's chronic, but also quote unquote adrenal fatigue, which is not a real medical term, but what we're trying to say with adrenal fatigue is that it's cortisol and stress is affecting your hypothalamus. So it's shutting down the signaling to the pituitary and ultimately the adrenals. So you have, it looks like the adrenals are exhausted, but they're not. It's just really the brain that's stopping it. But anyway, you end up with low cortisol as a result. And that's when you can run into hypoglycemia, because you need cortisol to increase blood glucose levels in the blood, right? So high or low cortisol will inhibit this enzyme called 5-alpha deiodinase, which is responsible for converting T4 to T3. That's a big deal. T3 is the active hormone in the body. Most of it is T4 in circulation, but the real impact on your cells and the reason why you are alive and functioning is because of T3. So when you have high or low cortisol, again, cortisol is a double-edged sword. It's good and it's bad. You need like the middle ground, the Goldilocks, right? It's the middle ground. That's what is best. High or low cortisol will decrease not only conversion of T4 to T3, but also receptor sensitivity, right, for the thyroid hormone, and reduces TSH responsiveness from the pituitary gland. So your thyroid hormone does not receive TSH, and therefore TSH stays high. So you can see how you can get really frustrated, or your doctor will say that your TSH is high, when really you could just have a lot of stress going on. Your cortisol levels are out of whack. Doesn't mean that your meds are off. It means your stress might be off. And actually, it's very common. If you don't account for the stress, whatever that might be for you, you have to be really, really, honest with yourself. And that's really a subjective opinion. But, and while you can objectively test for that too, and I'll get to that in a minute at the bottom. But yeah, that's the issue, is that if you don't correct for the stress, it doesn't matter where your meds are, because it's going to throw it off and your TSH will still stay high. Okay. But hypothyroidism alone, even without high stress or cortisol issues, can cause low glucose uptake into cells and a lowered insulin response. So really what that means is you may have normal levels of glucose, blood sugar in your blood, but you can still have symptoms of hypoglycemia. It's very interesting. Fatigue, headaches, hunger, irritability, right? This is all indicative of kind of hypoglycemic issues, right? And vice versa. Conversely, rather, high cortisol can result, and that can cause more thyroid issues as well, right? Because cortisol will want to kick in and try to pick up increase the blood glucose levels, and that's where that can cause a whole bunch of issues too. All right, but really, sugar issues, too much carb in the diet, can disrupt thyroid function and cause insulin resistance, even if stress alone is not really an issue. All right, which then turns into thyroid dysfunction and destruction and perpetuates inflammation. Okay, that can really happen. And naturally, thyroid disorders like Hashimoto's can cause sugar issues as well, like I just mentioned. But what we must understand that even if you are taking thyroid meds, dysfunctional adrenals, like I said, and stress can cause hypothyroid issues and create more havoc. So gaining control of your stress, whatever that is triggering for you, is of utmost importance if you are going to heal your thyroid. All right. Interestingly enough, though, mild adrenal insufficiency or low cortisol can affect, like I said, T4 to T3 conversion, as mentioned. And that can cause issues where it kind of pools in the blood and cause hyperthyroid symptoms. So that's a common symptom you hear that you've gone through yourself, where you kind of fluctuate between hypo and hyper. Well, that's one of the reasons why that happens, right? So it's really not a medication problem at all. It's the inability to absorb and utilize the hormone. So unwittingly, doctors cause you to go into into a hyperthyroid state. So how do you test for your, stress levels, your adrenals, right? Well, there are two things I would suggest. One is the home pupil test, which, I mean, listen, it's not 100% perfect, but it'll give you an idea of kind of where you stand. And basically what you'll do is you'll point the light at your pupils and then watch them constrict and then watch as they return to normal. And if they get small and then go back to normal really quickly or flutter, then it's probably positive for adrenal issues. Now, I would probably prefer that and suggest doing a 4-point adrenal salivary index, which would measure your cortisol levels throughout the day. And it's more of a more accurate test, I would say. All right. So moving on to the kidneys. Now, you know what the kidneys do, right? They maintain fluid and electrolyte balance, water and salt balance to keep the blood pH between, 7.3 and 7.4, which is slightly alkaline. And so the kidneys maintain this by controlling these electrolytes or ions, right? And diet and lifestyle can affect this too. So Hashimoto's naturally causes less blood flow to the kidneys, especially when your meds are off, right? You have cold hands and feet, right? You have brittle nails, thinning hair. It's all because of the low thyroid. Well, it's going to cause low blood flow to the kidneys too. And when that happens, it causes creatinine to build up and low blood pressure. But that can shift into high blood pressure, believe it or not, because if blood volume gets too low for too long, right? Say it's chronic, the hormone renin in the kidneys increases, which then stimulates angiotensin, right? And that causes blood vessel constriction. And that's how you get high blood pressure. But it also stimulates this hormone and neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. And that's a neurotransmitter that is released during a stress response, which causes not only high blood pressure, but increases heart rate. So now you have symptoms of hyperthyroidism too, along with potentially high blood pressure. Crazy, right? So that's what's going on. So if the kidneys aren't working properly, there's failure to also remove waste. And it forces the body to remove it through other channels like the skin, right? That's how you can get acne, right? It's one way to get acne and other sort of skin disorders, dermatological disorders. So if that happens, it can lead to gout, right? Which is uric acid crystals that form in the joints, acidosis, kidney and bladder infections, and kidney stones. So kidney stagnation then causes swelling and edema because it's retaining all this fluid, right? You get swelling under the eyes or in the hands, in the feet, as a result of this decreased kidney function, water and salt retention, and also poor lymphatic drainage. All right. So that's the deal with the kidneys. Let's move on to the liver. Probably, yeah, we're definitely one of the most important and under-recognized areas in the body, and what is greatly impacted with Hashimoto's. This does not get enough attention, so I'm going to get right into this. So listen, here's the deal, right? So too much omega-6, fatty acids, birth control, hormone replacement therapy, plastics, right? Plastic use, utensils, cups, things like that. That all really increases estrogen in the body. And that's a problem with autoimmunity because, part of the reason why it's a female dominant disease or autoimmunity or for that matter, is because estrogen is higher in females. And when that's the case, more estrogen basically stimulates the immune cells, right? So if they're already awry and they're already like running around, like very confused and hypervigilant and causing autoimmunity, well, they have receptors for estrogen. So more estrogen can definitely make them go more haywire, right? So while estrogen is controlled, it can be controlled, right, through your diet and lifestyle, having too much in general will increase thyroid binding globulin, which is a transporter for thyroid hormone. So if that increases, there's less free thyroid hormone available. And that basically means you have less available to activate the cells, right? And that's how you also get hypothyroid symptoms too. 60% of thyroid hormone is made in the liver. That's a lot. That is a lot, right? So poor liver functionality, because you have too much toxin, buildup, results in low thyroid output from the liver, right? Glucuronidation and sulfation are two major reactions that are part of phase 2 detoxification. There's phase 1 and phase 2. And glucuronidation and sulfation are two of them. But they're also involved in T3 production too, right? So if you don't have the right support system for the liver, you can't detox properly or make T3. It's a big issue, especially the detox part. And thyroid hormone has a massive effect on how lipids and cholesterol are broken down. When thyroid is low, the process of breaking down triglycerides and LDL cholesterol is also. So you end up with potentially high LDL and triglycerides, which is a risk factor for heart disease and atherosclerosis. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but yeah, that's how, easily a thyroid issue turns into a liver issue, which turns into a heart issue. It's all connected. So then we can talk about biotransformation, detoxification a little bit. So thyroid hormone impacts these enzymes called CYP450. They are what is responsible. There's a number of these, but they have different, functions and roles in the body with detoxing certain drugs and toxins. And one of them is removal of waste, like ammonia. Ammonia is a byproduct of bacteria and parasites that can lead to advanced liver damage, brain dysfunction, neurological disorders, chemical sensitivities, and more autoimmune diseases if it's not properly handled. So ammonia is a big deal because, listen, infections and parasites are very common in Hashimoto's. I see this a lot, especially with autoimmunity in general. And they're spitting out a lot of these, chemical compounds like ammonia. And that's a problem for a lot of those reasons I just mentioned. But hormonal imbalances are caused by really impaired detoxing a lot of the time. So a healthy liver is essential to balance out hormones, especially estrogen, right? Your liver will detoxify and kind of change the form of estrogen to the less potent cancerous type, right? Basically, we're looking at 2-hydroxy estrogen, whereas the 4 and 6 hydroxy are the more pro-cancerous type. So having a healthy liver will help kind of, resolve that also, but also dampen the overall estrogen load. Okay. So symptoms of poor liver detoxification listen, it doesn't mean if you have all these symptoms that you have poor liver detoxification. You're definitely going to want to do some testing for that. But bloating, hair loss, acne, skin issues, poor bowel function, swelling in the eyes, right? Dryness, near farsightedness, maybe goiter, can all be a sign of liver issues. Okay. But you know what? You can test for liver biomarkers, AST, ALT, two common markers you might see and have done before in your labs. But the liver cells also make albumin, which is a carrier protein as well for thyroid. And if you test albumin and prothrombin time, that will also be good for assessing liver functionality. Cool? All right, moving on to the gallbladder. Now, the gallbladder, as you know, makes, well, it doesn't make it. The liver makes bile, but it stores bile, right? And releases when fat is exposed to, and the small intestines are exposed to fat, right? So naturally, low thyroid causes slow gallbladder function. It makes it really sluggish and congested and causes gallstones if it's prolonged. And by the way, you can't resolve gallbladder issues until you fix your liver, because like I just mentioned, your liver is pushing out, making bile and storing in the gallbladder. So, a lot of toxins that we harbor are in the liver, and they get pushed to the bile. So guess what? You push that toxic bile into the gallbladder, and that's where you create all these problems, and then it gets in the gut and it creates even more problems. So you got to fix the liver and the gallbladder simultaneously, right? So if you don't have enough bile, or it's stuck and sluggish, you also are at risk for essential fatty acid deficiency or omega-3s, right? Like I said, you need bile to digest and absorb fat, right? And if you're having issues with fatty, greasy foods, then that's an indication of maybe gallbladder issues. Also, itchy skin. Yeah, if you got itchy skin, that can also be an indication of gallbladder issues or bile stagnation. There's toxin accumulation that occurs through enterohepatic circulation, right? Which I just mentioned, right? Where the liver dumps toxins into the bile, because the bile contains these toxins and it goes into the gut, gets reabsorbed into the blood, and does this damage by, these toxins do the damage by hitting cells, getting into cells, and then maybe they get recirculated back into the liver, and it becomes one big malicious cycle. Okay? Oops. So that's why this is really important. You got to ramp up your liver detoxification so that doesn't happen. And so these toxins get eliminated properly through the feces or the bile or the urine, and they stop doing their damage to the rest of your body and other organs. And again, aside from low stomach acid, inadequate bile flow can cause SIBO, because bile is like this detergent. It kind of sweeps the bacteria out of the small intestines. Okay? So if there's basically it's when bacteria decide to hang out and have like their own party, and that's when you get overgrowth. And if you don't have enough bile, then they kind of do their own thing. They rage, have a good old time, and they never get cleaned out. So symptoms of gallbladder issues, right, would include probably things like I mentioned, inability to eat and digest greasy or fatty foods, bloating several hours after a meal, flatulence, burping, itchy skin, like I said, and changes in your stool color, right? From like sort of a clay to a normal brownish. So you're going to have to really be mindful and see what's going on down there. Okay. Never thought I'd say that, but yeah. And lastly, gallbladder removal. Like if you get your gallbladder removed, it doesn't change anything, right? Because here's the deal. The cystic duct acts as a reservoir for bile. So you still need to eliminate bile, right? You still have bile that is toxic, okay? And you need to clean that out. You gotta refine that bile, okay? So some ideas to think about, or what you can do to support more bile. So lecithin is something I'll use, and phosphatidylcholine is another thing I'll use as a supplement to build more bile. All right. But keep in mind that you can build more bile, but like you still need to work on the liver, right? All right, moving on to the heart and the cardiovascular system. So thyroid affects cholesterol and triglycerides. So that's a risk factor for atherosclerosis, but it also stimulates HMG-CoA reductase, which speeds up the synthesis and utilization of LDL cholesterol and removes it from the liver. So when you have low thyroid hormone, you also are at risk for high homocysteine and CRP, which is a biomarker and indicates systemic inflammation. So really this has a major impact on these, on these compounds that affect, your heart health. So bruising and bleeding are definitely can be a risk as well with low thyroid activity and low plasma volume, because the capillaries, which are these small, tiny blood vessels, are become more leaky, and they kind of release water into the spaces, the interstitial spaces between the cells. And that's how you get issues with swelling in your legs and ankles. Okay. And high blood pressure, as I mentioned before, from the impact the kidneys have, right, is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. You guys know that. And thyroid hormone, we need to understand, is absorbed differently in different areas of the body. Okay, so T3, influences the sodium, calcium, and potassium channels of the heart, right? The heart relies on these electrolytes. And so adding more thyroid meds doesn't fix the issue when you have functional hypothyroidism, right? So that's part of the issue too. So the valves of the heart are affected in Hashimoto's. So if you have murmurs or anything like that, like an echocardiogram is definitely really important to do. All right. And lastly, we're going to check out the brain. All right. So here's the issue. When you have a leaky gut, you probably have a leaky brain. Sucks to say that, but consistent brain fog is an indication of inflammation in the brain, because when the blood-brain barrier is broken, there is chemical reactivity or pathogens that react with the microglial cells, right? These are cells that protect neurons and provide insulation between neurons. So when they're exposed to toxins, they will actually attack your neurons and turn on autoimmune reaction against the brain and cause loads of inflammation. And that's really, really hard to turn off. Okay. So symptoms of this sort of like brain-based fatigue would look like, fatigue from reading, from driving, and really just having a conversation with a friend or somebody. Okay. Not really fun stuff. And I know that's super common. And I know you might be experiencing that right now. Right. And then on a worst case scenario, it can lead to Hashimoto's encephalopathy, which is really like really bad brain disease. Okay. So yeah, again, this is the most pivotal point, I think, that, Hashimoto's and low thyroid activity has a massive impact on the brain, right? That's how you get at risk for, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So let's take a look quickly, though, at the neurotransmitters at the bottom: serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, and GABA. All right, because these all affect our mood, of course, you know that, and it can cause depression or anxiety if it's not balanced or controlled properly, or supported rather. So estrogen actually is interesting because it sensitizes serotonin receptors in the brain. So serotonin can do its job more effectively. So that's why estrogen is not always a bad thing, right? Insulin also is important because it increases serotonin absorption in the brain as well. And remember, 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, right? Healthy gut means healthy serotonin, and that can support your brain. So that neurotransmitter is responsible for keeping you in a good mood and happy, right? Joyful. So serotonin will modulate T3 production, believe it or not, right? And help with T4 to T3 conversion. And it can stimulate TSH from the pituitary. And then thyroid hormone also has an impact on the amount of serotonin synthesized. So the trouble is that depression can mask hypothyroidism if there's too little serotonin. And the depression is really stemming from a thyroid issue, right? So you take a psychotropic, you take it, Zoloft or something, when really it's your thyroid that's that's broken, right? That's what's dysfunctional. It's not your brain, at least not in that context, right? That root cause is the thyroid. So if we're looking at dopamine, that's the reward and pleasure neurotransmitter, right? People who have low dopamine levels are pretty much apathetic. They just they just don't have the drive to do anything, right? No motivation, right? And so thyroid causes release in dopamine, and low dopamine can also raise TSH. One thing I want to quickly mention before I forget is that hypothyroidism in a pregnant mother, and this is important to know for all of you who are considering conceiving, but if you are experiencing low thyroid functionality, you have hypo or Hashimoto's, you're basically, you're at risk for having a child with autism. Someone who has hypothyroidism has a fourfold increased risk of having a child with autism and mental retardation and a miscarriage compared to someone who doesn't. So be as thyroid healthy as possible before conceiving. It is not appropriate, in my opinion, to not get your health handled and try to have a child. I've seen actually plenty of women who have autistic children, and it's because they've unmanaged Hashimoto's. Not saying it's the only reason, but it's definitely a big factor. And this is shown in the research. Okay, so acetylcholine, this is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for making you able to focus and concentrate, right? And is used to make up for low thyroid. So T3 can actually stimulate acetylcholine as well. Okay, and GABA is a neurotransmitter that is associated with anxiety. So when it's low, usually it's associated with anxiety. So GABA influences TSH from the pituitary, and T4 and T3 as well. And thyroid keeps GABA in the system after it's released. So you can see how there's sort of a bidirectional pathway between the thyroid and these neurotransmitters. They both influence one another. Okay? And, one last thing I want to say is your connective tissue, right? Your tendons, your ligaments, your muscle, like your bone, all these parts of the connective tissue system are affected by your thyroid. So again, it just proves my point that thyroid literally affects everything. All right. So that wraps up the entire presentation. I hope that was really helpful and you have an idea of how important it is to get your thyroid handled, but also to get all these sort of dysfunctional parts of your body figured out too, if you have any of that showing up. Okay. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions about this, feel free to drop me a line, send a message, do what you got to do. All right. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'll see you guys soon.